welcome to Ireland on the Fly. This week sees the return of our book club series, and I'm delighted to say, and no doubt our listeners will be delighted too, that I'm joined as co-presenter by Ken Whelan for this episode. When Dara took his sojourn early on in the year, he had agreed that he would join us again for any book club editions. And fair play to him, he is sticking to his word, and it's really good to have him on the show again. Our guest tonight is renowned sea trout angler Chris McCully, who has just published his new book, Fly Fishing for Irish Sea Trout. Chris has been on with us before on the book club. 2 years ago, he discussed his book, The Names of the Fish in British and Irish Waters. Chris has spent decades writing about fish, rivers and the people who pursue them. And many of our listeners will know him from his landmark work, Nomads of the Tides, co-authored with Ken Whelan, which is regarded as one of the definitive guides to Irish sea trout. A lot of the material in this new book comes from Nomads, but as Chris explains, it is not just a reprint. Chris was also a regular feature writer with Trout and Salmon, so many of our listeners will know him from here too. As is normally the case with our book club, we generally go far beyond the parameters of just the book, and this episode is no different. We discuss the fact that contemplative angling existed more than 500 years ago, and what income supplement for small farmers meant in the 1950s on the western seaboard. But before we talk to Chris, Dara, I don't know if you've been doing too much salmon fishing, but I know for definite you have been doing a fair bit on the Last Salmon podcast. Tell us how that's been going.
Yeah, we started season 3 actually, Tom, and it's good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on again. Really
you're doing well in my absence.
Yeah, no, I'm sure the listeners will be delighted to hear you again. Delighted to hear you again.
I know, and in fairness, actually, I've been enjoying listening because I haven't been doing a huge amount of fly fishing, but do you know what it is? It's almost like I'm the listener audience now, and I actually like tuning in to get the updates. When I was listening to yourself and Mike, how is the mayfly going? Updates from Garrett on the salmon. Garrett, you're doing a great job. Mike, you're doing a great job. Keep it up. But it's listening to that, getting the updates. You know what I mean? It's kind of what's happening in the fly fishing world in Ireland, and so as a listener, it's really interesting to kind of keep my foot in the door that way. But yeah, I've been busy. So season 3 of the Last Salmon started June. Actually, we started on June 1st, Wild Salmon Day, which was great. We did it with Matt Hayes, Marina Gibson, and Vala from Iceland. So it was really interesting, kind of pulling different countries and insights together in terms of salmon. And I think the other interesting thing about the way the Last Salmon is kind of developing, and I think it's also probably mirrors the development of my own salmon fishing, and maybe a lot of salmon anglers are the same, is, and I think we mentioned it before as well, Tom, is becoming more conservation minded.
And she's like this year as well, like in terms of the conditions, like, A, obviously a lot of fisheries are closed. B, you wouldn't want to be going out handling fish, trying to, disturb the salmon. And like, you start to become kind of, I found the ratio of angling versus conservation was kind of starting to tilt, one versus the other. Like, but don't get me wrong, I'd still love to get out to any of those nice fisheries in Iceland or Labrador or some of those places where you could spend a nice week. Although it was like you always said to me, the best salmon anglers are usually the wealthiest. These places take a lot of money to get to.
Yeah, I'd like to be in that position.
Mind you, actually, and Richard Flint went out during the week. I said that to him because I often said it. I said, the best salmon anglers are the wealthiest. And he turned to me and he says, and the happiest are the ones that have given it up.
Well, there is a lot of that frustration side of it. But I suppose, so the Last Salmon is kind of, this season has developed a kind of more conservation-minded kind of focus.
Yeah.
So we spoke really interesting. We got an interview with Maui Scotland CEO Ben Hadfield, which was an interesting one. He was obviously defending their practices, and it's kind of like, you're putting, facts and figures, science, and they go, well, kind of, that's your facts and figures, but here's our facts and figures. And but the really interesting thing was at the end of the episode, we pulled up a whole list of commitments, and he said, right, will you commit to X, Y, Z? And he committed to a few of them, like kind of in terms of kind of research and that kind of stuff. So we said, right, we'll come back in 12 months then and, hold a mirror.
Right, interesting.
Yeah, so look, a lot of people say, look, you shouldn't be getting into bed with the devil, so to speak. But, it's interesting to kind of try and I think from an angler's perspective, hearing that and they kind of go, they won't believe, or agree with any of it. But, to come back in 12 months would be interesting to see where it's at. Really interesting thing, actually, when you speak to other people is they reckon, he denied this anyway, but that because of the way the climate's going, with the warmer waters, more, hurricanes, kind of wilder weather, more storms, that a lot of, the likes of the Maui, they see the writing on the wall, that they're trying to squeeze the last drop that they can out of the salmon farms because they know they won't have a future there because of the way the conditions are going and the way the growing opposition. And so they're trying to
Okay.
squeeze this last drop. Now, whether it means they just go further north or do they
Yeah,
going to
that's what I was
find,
going to ask. What do you think? Is it that they'll move further north? Is it that, like, let's say storms and things with damage to cages, would that entail that they move to land based? Is that
well, they'll argue the commercial imperative isn't there, that you wouldn't get, what they want in terms of harvest tonnage, and I just saw a figure, I think was it their operating revenues or something went up again, like they're making more money than ever. But it's interesting, like you look at Iceland,
Mm.
in terms of the growing opposition there, we've mentioned it before. Like they're trying to find new areas and they're kind of struggling, like, because of conditions, because of public opposition. So they're in a bit of a tight squeeze, it was an interesting one, actually, just on the last salmon. The next episode we've got coming out in 2 weeks is with a guy called Ross Brawn, who was the former head or chief engineer or something like that for Ferrari in the F1. Right.
Right.
Really interesting guy. He's kind of came from like an engineering background and he got involved in motorsport like in the 1970s and the 1980s, worked his way up, got involved with Ferrari. What happened was Michael Schumacher went to Ferrari and your man and Ross Brawn followed him. Right. So
Right.
like when Schumacher was like
Mm.
winning all these world championships in F1, Ross Brawn was like the main honcho there. He also set up his own F1 team as well and all that kind of stuff. So really interesting guy. But the flip side of it is, anyway, he's big into fly fishing. And I thought it was a very interesting comment he put, because again, he's kind of coming at it from that kind of engineering precision
Yeah.
kind of brain, where he was asked about salmon farming, and he made a very good comparison. He says, the way with Europe and getting rid of the internal combustion engine
Yeah.
by 2035. And he said, but that's the wrong argument. He says, what they should have said to them was, because he says it's just getting rid of it, but where's the solution? What's the alternative? He says, whereas what the EU should have said to the car companies was, by 2035, you're to have no more emissions. You need to find a solution. He says, get the people to find a solution, make it happen so that they have to find a solution, innovate and adapt. And he was making the same argument for salmon farming. You need to say to them, no, open water, um, pens are allowed or whatever, that they have to find a solution to adapt and change.
Yeah. Yeah.
To make them try to think outside the box as opposed
Yeah.
to just going blanket ban.
Change the directive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting. So so that was it. So we're busy on that. So a couple of episodes around that. It's a 10-part series, so it's every 2 weeks the episodes. It's out on Spotify, it's out on Apple, it's out on YouTube, and it'll be running up until the end of September, I think.
No, excellent. That's great. Brilliant. Now we'll put the link up for that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, and come here. So tell us, how's it been for you in terms of driving solo and
this weather at the moment?
suntan weather?
Yeah, fucking suntan weather. That's been it. We're over in the Orkney.
Oh yeah.
I didn't say Orkneys. I said we're in the Orkney. So yeah, but heat wave wasn't as bad over there. Heat wave wasn't as bad over there. Still 21 degrees. We got some good fishing. A couple of evening sessions out with the lads. Took us out evening sessions on Harry. So while the fishing wasn't as good as it had been the last couple of years,
Still better.
it still wasn't. It still wasn't desperate. It was still a good action.
And actually, just speaking of that in the way we were talking about kind of salmon and cold waters and moving further north, do you think, like, will you see it where if the heat waves get more extreme or longer, like, would you have to go more towards very early or late evening fishing?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, we're probably not too bad here on the West Coast, but there's even a difference between here, the West Coast and the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
But, definitely, like in the UK, there's very limited, you know, trout fishing during this July and August heat waves. Yeah. For example, I was chatting to the lads who were, they're at a competition in Clwyd in Wales there a week and a half ago, and it was all booby bashers. I don't know. Do you know what the booby basher is?
It's
It's it,
what?
the fly line.
Oh, okay. Is it
Okay, so it's a 40-yard fast sinking line, right?
Yeah.
It casts it's like trying to cast a block, right? But if you get it right, the line will shoot out and you'll get the whole line out. If you can load the rod, but not everybody can do it. Yeah, but a couple of guys have perfected it. So you feck the whole line out 40 yards. I think it's actually nearly 40 yards in length. And it sinks like a DI7, DI8. So it sinks
Right.
8 inches a second. Okay. And you just chuck it out. And in Clwyd Dog, what you're doing, the guys who did well were the guys who are getting out the full length of line, figure of eighting back, and they were catching the fish down at 40 feet.
It's right down where it's cold and dark.
Yeah,
and
where the
deep.
fish are.
Yeah, where the fish are.
Where the fish are. And it was the only way you kept.
Wow.
And actually, Clwyd Dog is actually up in the hills. So I can only imagine like the Midland reservoirs in the UK are really suffering. The guide out during the week was saying like he fishes Pittsford, which is Midlands as well. And he says, I don't think I'll be fishing that before September.
Too
So
well.
what you're saying, yeah, okay, maybe it mightn't affect us here, but it's getting here.
So could you? Yeah, and like, will you start testing that out in terms of your own and carp getting down deep and
Having the notion, needles in my eyes, sooner, but needles in my look, I have tried it. I have fished DI7 and I have caught on it. Look, to be honest, I do DI7 fishing on Harry in the Orkney, and I enjoy it. But look, it's not everybody's cup of tea. I enjoy doing it because I enjoy all types of fly fishing, but there's a lot of people wouldn't be interested in it.
And you having to strip quick?
To the booby basher, what they were saying, no, they were figure of eighting. Gets down quick and you keep it in touch.
Okay, just keep in touch so it stays down.
Just you're keeping in touch with it.
Jeez, it sounds like Skagit line fishing, for the salmon. Like it's just it's like a lead line, isn't it? You're just trying to
that's it.
bash it out, It's like I remember when I was doing it, I compare it to like hitting with a driver as opposed to a 9-iron. In terms of the finesse versus the
no finesse. No finesse with the driver. It just whacks. And, if you get it right, that's lovely. If you get it wrong,
you get one of those in the side of your face.
Booby bash is the exact same thing. Yeah, but is it going to happen here? Oh, I don't know. I mean, like, to be honest with you, this is definitely the third season of the trot, Dara, that fishing has been stopped. Due to high water temperatures.
Yeah, and although I would point people back to the episode we did previously with Ken Whelan on the changing climate.
That's
it might even be worth reposting. Sorry, I'm just looking up here as we're speaking. Yeah. June 27th, 2025. Trout and hot water. Ken Whelan on fly fishing in a changing climate.
Mm-hmm.
It details the impact and consequences of rising temperatures on our freshwater fish as well as their food sources. And he challenges anglers to start thinking and adapting to the changing habit and the waters that we are going to be seeing. There you go. We should repost that one, actually. Sorry, you should repost that one.
I'll repost it, so.
Jesus Christ, I have to do the work for you now as well. Want me to start editing the files and everything?
No, I know. You taught me well now. You taught me well. First one took me 4 hours, Dara.
For a 4-minute interview, Jesus Christ.
4 hours, yeah.
I have it down to 3 hours, 55 minutes.
I really honed it down. Yeah, really. I've become a genius.
But you're not believing, like, one take wonder, hit record and away you go. Feck the consequences.
Oh, God. Yeah, sometimes I think, I might try that, but no, just in case. Just
Right. Well, we're chatting to Chris McCully today.
yeah, it was great to have him on. Chris, a friend of the show now. Second episode. So basically, Chris's new book out, Fly Fishing for Irish Sea Trout, which is sort of, as he says himself, is a lot more, not exactly a reprint or a reissue, because he has changed things in it, but of his classic book, Nomad of the Tides. It was great to have him on and great to ask him what the book was about, where it differs from Nomad of the Tides and what he's added to it, what he's left out and everything. But it's just great to have on. He's really interesting. Really.
Yeah, I don't know if people remember him. He used to write for Trout and Salmon, and he's really interesting articles. Um, he's very well read. He's a former professor of English literature. I think he's about 30 books to his name between, what he's edited, what he's written about English literature and fly fishing. He wrote the one, was it Names of the Fish? And
Names of the Fishes. That was great, because that's when we had him on last. We discussed that. And because I was, prior to getting him on, I actually listened to that one again, not all of it. And I was just, God, yeah.
He's just an interesting guy,
Yeah.
And I think we were saying afterwards, yeah, I'd love to. I'd spend a day fishing with him in the boat, because you'd just hear some you'd learn stuff,
it's spoiler alert, it's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, Chris, if you're listening, we will see you in the boat sometime soon. But it was well worth. And so, for a lot of people who, I know we've had a lot of people contacting us about Nomads of the Tides, and it's out of print and you can't get it, and Chris addresses that as well. I suppose Fly Fishing for Irish Sea Trout is a more abridged, up-to-date version of that for people. So it's definitely well worth a read, and I certainly enjoyed it.
Definitely well worth a read. And also as well, I have to say, is we have a copy given to us by Medlar Press. So yes, to give away. So we'll do some form of a competition on social media.
But what we might do is put it in the posts, in the social post. We might ask a question or something, then people can email in or something like that. So look, I suppose, Ursula, I asked him, didn't I, about the background to the book and the context to it, and here is Chris on all that.
So, I mean, it was so long ago that I even began to draft this and to think of doing a slimmed down edition of the original Nomads, that it seems already this book to be sepia tinged. So much has happened in the last few years. But anyway, here we are. And I'm glad to see it. And I'm glad to see both of you.
Actually, can I just say, Tom, I don't know if you're the same, Tom, as Chris, the amount of people I've had that were on to me before looking to try and get hold of copies of Nomads of the Tides. That people were just, like, I think even especially after what we did the interview with yourself the last time, Chris, and obviously it's out of print, but the amount of people like, how can I get a copy? Where can I get a copy? And even, secondhand copies are like hen's teeth trying to get a copy.
Yeah, I think the original print run was pretty small, and I mean, this point has been made to me over a number of years, actually. And I had one bookseller here in the UK saying, "Oh, I could have sold many copies of the original." But it was, it was a really massive project. It was a massive book. It was the original, 480 odd pages. Full color illustrations, line drawings, the lot. It was very expensive to produce. And when it came out, I mean, typically I'd done something ridiculously overambitious. There was a whole website that came alongside it, which described estuaries which hadn't found a place in the main text. There was a whole section on spinning for Irish sea trout, free line, sound eel fishing, all sorts of stuff. And alongside that, there was a blog, which I did as a sort of running commentary as I was making all those repeated trips over to the Republic and to the North. And there was my own personal website, which, I would update. I have to say, I'm not the most technologically literate or enthusiastic soul in the world. And the fact that I was keeping up the websites was really on the advice of one of my other publishers, who asked all of his writers to, make themselves more visible in an internet age. And I did so rather grumblingly. But you can see even from that rather brief description that the original project had multiple dimensions. I was being overambitious, typically. And it was very difficult to sustain that. So the print run was relatively small. And after 3 or 4 years, I felt, well, we've shot our bolt. I can't keep everything updated all the time, particularly because I wasn't traveling over to Ireland with the frequency that I did when I constructed the original text. So, so there was a kind of hiatus, but I never quite gave up the idea of trying to do a smaller, less ambitious. It's not exactly a second edition, but a new kind of book, a proper book without all the overambitious appendages.
So was that the basis then for kind of fly fishing for Irish Sea Trout? That it was a case of, all right, how can we do a pared down version essentially? Like,
I think when I first, if I go back many years, and I first put the original idea to John Ward-Allen at Medlar Press, I think what we shared was this idea of a book about, I don't know, somewhere in the back of our heads there were the great Irish fishing hotels, there were tweed jackets, there were cane rods slightly warped hanging over hooks, there were Bibios and Zulus on a cast that had been put together in 1976. It was that sort of rather nostalgic feel of a book. But as soon as I started doing the work that eventually fed into this big original project, I thought, well, no, I don't want something nostalgic and sepia tinged. I want something that's current and that's going to be useful and representative of white trout fishing, sea trout fishing as it is in the 21st century. So that's how the original project came about. But a lot happened after. Sorry to rattle on. Is this okay that I just you were kind enough to ask about how the new text of Irish
because I think I think it ties in with it, like, so that's why I'm fascinated.
And I think it's important to know something about the origin of the new text. After Nomads was published, it was 2013, and I didn't visit Ireland that year, but in 2014 I was back and I was fishing the mayfly on Mask and on Con, and in 2015 I went again and fished in the north. I fished in Donegal, but I fished in Northern Ireland as well for sea trout. 2016 I was back again, 2017, 2018 back in the north again. And through those years, those 5 or 6 years after Nomads had been published, I never quite relinquished the idea of doing what I call privately a portable edition of Nomads. This was a 250-page, concise, informative, stripped-back version of the original text, where possible, keeping some of the best of the original stories, the sort of narrative line of some of the original text, but also including a little bit of new material, particularly on the north of Ireland, which attracted me very greatly, particularly the country of the Foyle, the River Finn, the River Lennon. That was magnificent country and wonderful sea trout fishing by my own fairly modest standards. And so I wanted to write about that. And because I'd never quite given up the idea of a smaller text, I drafted in 2018, a shorter version. 2019, I didn't visit Northern Ireland, and in 2020, I had a big heart attack, which meant that I really didn't know that I was going to work again, let alone publish again. And then COVID came, and I was out of action for a while. Slowly got back to work, and more or less sort of forgot about this project. I had other things to do. I had books to finish and my academic career to finish, and I needed to retire. But in 2022, 23, as I retired, John came back, and John Ward-Allen at Medlar came and said, well, look, what about that Irish Sea Trout book? It would be a pity not to have something in print about sea trout fishing in Ireland. And so I said, well, I do have that TypeScript, which we've all forgotten about. So I revisited that in 2022, 23. I looked up all the available catch statistics on the IFI Inland Fisheries Ireland website that I could find. I double checked that fisheries were open. I added some web references and so on and so forth, and knocked the thing into some sort of publishable shape. So that's more or less how this particular book came into being. It was a mixture of slightly strange timing, accident, residual ambition, and a desire to see something, to keep something in print about a form of fishing that has been very, I don't want to use the word special, but very present to me and many others over many years.
How have you rated the last few years, though, Chris? Like, how has it changed, improved, disimproved? What have you noticed?
I can't really, speak for Ireland because I visited so seldom in the last few years. I still get reports, of course. I still keep up with the angling reports. I still occasionally speak to Ken, friends who live down in Kerry, who give me reports about what's happening on Curran. I still get reports about fish farming, salmon farming. So I keep up sporadically, and that'll disappoint some of your listeners, I'm quite sure. But I can't do everything, and of course I'm domiciled. I'm living now back in Yorkshire, back home. And if I fish for sea trout at all, my interests now take me up to the River Till, to the Tweed Valley, to the Yorkshire Esk, and to start thinking about sea trout of the North Sea. So that's occupying increasing amounts of my attention. I would say one thing, and I don't know quite how this impacts on fishing on the western seaboards of Ireland, but the ban on sand eel fishing, which was retained in 2024, I think, as a result of EU and UK post-Brexit negotiations. I think the ban on sand eel fishing can't do any harm. That may seem peripheral, but I think that it's such an important food item for the sea trout that it's important that we don't send trawlers around the coast hoovering these things up.
Actually, Tom, can I ask you that question then, just in terms of the sea trout fishing? You might be more aware in terms of kind of recent times what you're like. Obviously, we had Paddy Gargan that wrote a book about the fisheries in the West. Just what are you hearing, Tom, and what are you saying?
It fluctuates a lot. I don't know if you're hearing that as well, Chris, but it fluctuates on the West Coast. And a lot has to do sometimes with, there's a practice within agriculture where they'll leave a farm fallow, which they have to do. And when that happens, whichever estuary is pertinent to the fishery, like the one in Tumbiola affects the Ballynahinch and Lahaina. And when that happens, you'll have a good year in Lahaina. Same when the one is off on Killary, Delphi and Tawnyard will do well. So a lot, if you look at some of the good sea trout fishing I've had over the last 5 or 6 years, it's probably coincided with the system that had, that the agriculture was operating a fallow year. Mm-hmm. So, and it's crazy to think of that instantly, there's a response.
Yeah.
The scale goes up as soon as it does. So, yeah. What's it like overall? I suppose while I'm doing more than Chris, I wouldn't be doing as enough as any serious sea trout fisher would have had. And I suppose like the likes of Joe Crane, who we've had on, who fishes in Ina a lot and back there. But, I hear a lot. And like, for example, last year, the Costo system. So last year, is it last year? I'm nearly certain I'm going to say, it's last year that it fished quite well. And quite a good average size of sea trout in it, of white trout in it. So you do hear reports like that. But I also think, I don't know, you might agree with me this, I think we want to hear the good reports. We want to give the good reports. Do you know? We want to see a bit of sea trout fishing back again.
Can I ask, just maybe slightly off topic, or maybe it's not, is, with my grub in salmon fishing, that salmon fishing is in danger of going the way
It is.
sea trout is, as in the sense of exactly, that's what you said, Tom. We're looking for good reports.
Yeah.
And it's just striking as we're chatting there. This is the future of what we could be talking about, or not even the future, but that we're talking about salmon. And that they're so intertwined now in terms of their future. Like,
I think there's a further, if I may, there's a further thing to throw into the conversation, and it's climate change.
Yeah. Yeah.
As part of my rather last minute and rather desperate prep for talking to you both, I reread Ken Whelan's section in original Nomads on Lives of the Sea Trout about sea trout biology. And there's a fascinating section in there about climate change and sea lice. Parasites of all kinds thrive in seawater, which is warm. So if we're having warmer, wetter winters, and we don't have strict regimes of lice control or fallowing, by the time the smolts are running to sea in the spring, and if they find that the waters are low and they have to run out on a fairly low amount of fresh water, there's no big flood to flush them out to sea so they can begin their feeding at sea, or in the case of salmon, run through the estuaries quickly to get out to the open sea. If we get those conditions, then it's a very poor outlook for both the returning sea trout and the survival of salmon smolts, because those two are going to be badly lice affected as they try and get through the lethal curtain of sea lice. So, I think the combination of climate change, sea lice, fallowing is good, but I mean, wouldn't it be nice if open cage farming was stopped and something more along the line of Canadian, Norwegian closed containment systems are introduced? Problem is they're more expensive, and even then the wastewater has to go somewhere. So
they're not without their problems.
No. I gather so, but I'm no expert on that. But you make an interesting point. If we get a good year, whether it's salmon or whether it's sea trout, I'm the same. I breathe a sigh of relief, and I think, oh goodness, thank goodness. It's one less thing to worry about. Maybe I can not worry about this and try to act with the intensity that I have acted in the past. Maybe we're turning a corner. But it's not happened, has it? It hasn't happened. And for the past 30 years, you and I and people like us have been having these conversations, and we've been shaking our heads. And it's happened on our watch.
Yep.
And I think Quran is prime example if you want to take a kind of a model for what can happen and what has happened.
Yeah.
In terms of the kind of the jewel and the crown, and we know exactly why, and nothing was done about it, and you just hear fewer and fewer reports from Quran.
I think they're still getting a few salmon. I mean, a dear friend of mine lives down in Waterville, and so I do get reports from him. And I revisited Quran and actually fished it. At least I fished Dariana and some of the upper lakes in 2017, 2018. And I wrote a section about that fishery for this new book, or new iteration of the Irish Sea Trout book. But I ended up actually revising it and cutting most of it from the final.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. Because I found it was just so sad. I'd rather, in a way, it's like remembering an old marriage. It's like you'd rather remember the good times.
Yeah.
and the good stories. I'm sorry to put this rather sentimentally, but it was just so heartbreakingly sad. I mean, this was one of the best sea trout fisheries in Europe.
Yeah.
And I remember Tom O'Shea telling me a great story about the old days, the great old days when couples used to go and fish. And very often they'd be English couples, man and wife, and they'd vie with each other to see who could catch 50 sea trout first in their fortnight's fishing. And very often it'd be, one or the other. Usually the woman would get 50 sea trout in the first week. And then Tom said there would be slammed doors and abandoned gin and tonics and threats of divorce and the lawyers, all sorts of shenanigans as marital jealousy rode into the annual holiday. And I just think, well, it was a great story. And I prefer to remember, Karan in those sort of terms, not in terms of marital dispute, but in terms of the abundance of a run of fish.
Actually, Chris, did you ever get to fish Quran when it was on song?
The last time was 2008 or 2009, and someone caught a 10 1/4 pounder the same day we were fishing.
Right.
I got a fish. My boat partner, a guy called Andy Bowman, a very expert sea trout fisher, got a nice fish about 1.5 pounds, and I was really on form. I was glorious that evening, and managed to conjure a sea trout, a finnock of 14 ounces from the waters of Loch Carran. I thought that was a glorious achievement by my standards.
Well, you still hooked and landed in Quran, so that's the.
Yeah, but I never fished it in the great old days. In the 1970s and 80s. If I was lucky, I'd be invited out to Connemara and I'd fish out there. And much later, in the 80s and the 90s, I would occasionally go back. But by then, I was fishing a lot in the western seaboard of Scotland and in the Scottish Islands. Yeah. And there too, what happened there? On Mull, on Skye, in went the cages and away went the sea trout. So. Just done a little bit of fishing on the Scottish Islands. In fact, last year, I was out in a fairly remote part of the Hebrides, and I was fishing for sea trout in a spot where a small bog river runs into the sea. I got a lovely fish one evening. It wasn't particularly big by anybody's standards. It must have been 2.5 pounds, something like that. But the tide line was filled. There'd been a storm, and the tide line was littered with herring fry. They looked like tiny little baby tarpon, 3 inches long. And I was fishing a sort of flash sunk lure, which was the spit of these herring fry. And the next night I went back as it was dusk, and I got another 4 more sea trout, and they were beautiful fish, unmarked. When I looked up 50 yards away, there was an otter fishing in the bay, and out in the bay, there was a seal. And beyond that, there was a just risen moon. And there was nobody. It was just me, the otter, the seal, the moon, and the sea trout. And I remember driving home and saying to my wife, you won't believe what's just happened. It was like, I had to sort of pinch myself and thought, did I actually die? Did that heart attack take me off? Did I wake up here? Is this some sort of version of heaven? It was great.
That's why we do it, isn't it?
It is why we do it, yeah.
It's those moments, and I know exactly. Do you think, Tom and Chris, like dedicated sea trout anglers, are they becoming harder and harder to find?
I know of 1 or 2. I think you should ask somebody from Wales. The sea trout rivers in Wales are a formidable proposition to me, but there'll be very, very expert fishers who fish those rivers regularly. So invite someone who fishes the Towie.
Or what about Ireland? Tom, what about in Ireland?
I think they're getting fewer and far between, because where do you go?
Yeah.
Where do you go?
The East Coast, don't you hear decent enough fishing sometimes on the East Coast?
Yeah, there are some of the East Coast rivers do have good sea trout. And I know a couple of lads I bring out that have come here doing a bit of loch fishing. do tell me of some decent sea trout fishing that they have. But one or two places they talk about on the East Coast, one in particular, is hammered by poaching. Absolutely hammered by poaching. And so, I mean, it's before people think it's, there's a little bit of nirvana to be found there, they have their problems too, they have their problems too. So yeah, that said, there would be, I know a couple of lads, I mean, Jason, who we've had on here doing his mullet fishing, he does a hell of a lot of sea trout fishing as well. So there would be, but I suppose in my view, and maybe you probably agree with me, Chris, why I think this, my vision of a sea trout fisherman in Ireland is on the west coast, who's hopping from Costello, going up to Kylemore, maybe out to Screeb, do a day on Ina, maybe talk about Carreel, things like that, and then they'll do their week in Curran,
Exactly.
Yeah, but and it's funny, and in that little vox pops that I gave, and showing my age, I didn't include Donegal because by the time I started fishing, Donegal had ceased to be any good for sea trout.
I mean, I think sea trout fishing, it's a really interesting question because on the one hand, you've got a lot of people who are far more interested in salmon. Salmon still have the cachet. In Donegal, for example, when I fished the Fin, I had wonderful sea trout fishing one night, but during the day, that river was being very enthusiastically fished by some very young, very skilled salmon anglers.
Yeah.
We fished it all day for the salmon. There was a run of grills coming through. The water was perfect. They weren't interested in fishing for sea trout at night. On the Irish East Coast, I mean, I had some wonderful fishing there, on Strangford, on Carlingford. The Castletown River is very enthusiastic. It's a sea trout river. I'm sure some salmon do get up it, but it's enthusiastically fished. It's wonderfully well run and maintained by some fantastically enthusiastic and great anglers, great souls. I know some anglers here, actually, in Yorkshire and County Durham, who fish the Weir, the Tyne, the Yorkshire-esque, the River Till, and they're sea trout specialists. Not necessarily fly fishermen. They'll use the spinner as well, but hugely knowledgeable. But I think salmon still has cachet. The other thing is, and it's a much wider question, it's about age. What do young fly fishers do? What do young anglers do? I suspect that they're more likely to go to fish for carp than they are to fish for sea trout. If they come out to fish.
Why is that, Chris?
The waters are accessible. It's cheap. There are toilets. You can park. You don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time learning the lake. You don't have to fish antisocial hours. If you're still working, I mean, I've done it. I'm sure you have. You fished until 2 or 3 in the morning. You've had 3 or 4 hours kip. You've had a quick shower and you've gone to work again. But I don't know that people do that anymore. So I think there's an age profile thing going on here. I'm uncertain of my ground, and that's why I'm sounding tentative. But you asked an interesting question. Who is sea trout fishing anymore? There's no question that my generation, who are in their 60s and 70s, who I think we were probably the last of the generations who went out to the Wests, whether it was the west of Ireland or the west of Scotland, for a fortnight in the summer. They loaded the car up with the picnic campers, their clothes, their waders, the rods, a Labrador or two, a Spaniel. Wife was there as a sort of afterthought. Sorry, that's a throwaway comment, and take that as lightly as it was intended. But that's gone.
But can I say though that that grew up because the fish were there?
Yeah,
it was great fishing, and you had decades, centuries of that where the culture grew up around it, so it fed into it, and that's why and the history and the lore and the flies and everything else, and the accommodation and the gillies all built up around that. So if that's dying off, you can understand why the young anglers kind of go, well, there's no fish there. And again, I again bring the analogy back to salmon angling. It's like, well, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of hassle. Why the hell should I put myself through all that? And aside from the fishing, what I kind of feel most nostalgic for is that dying off of that culture. That, it becomes that sepia tone. We talk about it as a historic thing. That we're hanging on by a thread, but we'll never see it grow back to the way it was, because that's just the reality of it. Because if anything else, because of climate change and fish farming and all the rest of it. So it's like a niche subculture, isn't it? That might just about survive in pockets. Now, I think we should probably take whales out of this, obviously, but it's just going to survive as pockets, as kind of something that a few crazies kind of do for just mad reasons.
And yeah, but the old regime also had its downsides. I mean, there were aspects of noblesse oblige and snobbery, and it was, I don't know. I mean, if I look at it in the most positive light, pragmatically, the rivers and the river systems were very, very often carefully managed. Reds, the salmon reds, the sea trout reds would be looked after. There'd be river watchers up there. There were bailiffs. There were gillies. The water courses would be walked every autumn to make sure that there weren't obstructions in the water courses so the fish could get up. That was a point that was made to me on bell trout actually many years ago, I suppose 15 years ago, about how carefully that system was managed. So there were some very positive aspects of how those systems were managed back in those days, but there were also some aspects of, I don't think I'd have liked to have made a living in a short season visiting English people about, on the lakes.
Yeah.
I think that would have been very, very hard work. We didn't have guides in those days, Tom. They were all gillies.
Boatmen. Sometimes, and the old phrase, and that's where boatmen came from. There weren't actually guides or gillies. They were there specifically to row the boat.
To row, yeah. And it was a short season.
Yeah, it was 3 months.
Exactly.
It was 3 months.
What did you do? What did you do in the winter?
I fished with one of the lads in the Carrow Club, and they're involved with Costello now, and we have a club match with them every year, and we actually have it on the Costello system. It's fantastic. So, and you could fish any of the lakes there. But one of the lads in the club there, I'd love to get him on. But some of the stories he told me of the old gillies there, and they would have been. I mean, you're talking back. You look at the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. That's what he was looking back at. These guys would have been not like small farmers, most probably, and they supplemented their income any way they could, and the 3 months that they got supplemented their income. That's it. Some of them didn't care too much for fishing. All they cared for was getting the work. But I remember he told me there was about between 10 and 12 working on the Costello fishery.
It doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
But could you offer that sort of way of life, and it would be a way of life, small holding plus pulling people about it, could you offer that to a young person these days?
No.
It couldn't.
No, he couldn't. Couldn't offer even a small holding.
I mean, slowly it's all disappearing, and with it, actually not so slow, relatively quickly, this is all disappearing.
It is. I mean, I was going to say to you, Darren, when you said it, like we're looking through sepia tone, you said like it's almost in the past. I think it's almost in the past already.
Oh, yeah.
But then sometimes I turn around to myself, and your head can be a great place. Do you know what? Sometimes I go, maybe they'll find out that, let's say, for example, the fish farms, that, land-based production, contained cages is the way to go. It's actually going to be more profitable, and they do that. And suddenly, because I honestly think that's the only way they're ever going to change, because they're dictated to by profits. That's what keeps them going. But if something happens that makes them worth their while to change from open cage in the sea, and suddenly that happens, and then I sort of think, wow, wouldn't it be great? Imagine if all the sea trout came back to the systems in Connemara.
Yeah,
Right.
but
Can I add something here?
Yeah.
I want to offer you. This is going to sound unbearable. I want to offer you a vision.
Okay.
One of the reasons for doing the original Nomads project and for keeping something about Irish sea trout in print was the need to record what was once there. And as part of the original project, there were maps, and some of these maps are in my possession, and some of them were hand sketches that I'd done. And some of the old lakes, you will have this on the Corrib. Some of the old lakes had been mapped and their depth contours charted in the 19th century, and superimposed on that there would be lines of boat drifts, good sea trout drifts, good salmon drifts, good salmon rock. And I couldn't represent all of these maps in the original text, but they are out there. They're parts of estate records, or they will be out there. Now, if ever the sea trout come back, we will need knowledge of those drifts, because there are very few people alive who will remember the drifting lines.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that you can find sea trout really between sort of 2 feet and 12 feet.
Yeah.
On a depth contour of a lake. You know, and I know that when the water rises, they'll head for the lake's inflow first, and they'll probably stop there and then distribute themselves back through the lake as the water falls.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, so we know all these things in general terms, but there are very few people still alive who know the old drifts on the lakes, on the Inver system or the Gowler, or even actually, I imagine, parts of the Costello and the Cache.
Yeah.
So we need the maps, we need the knowledge, we need the diaries. Now, you said something quite interesting earlier on, which was about fallowing of the fish farms. Sea trout are great nomads, and even systems which are currently depopulated of sea trout, it's just barely possible that in their nomadic explorations of fresh water, fish from an adjacent system will run up into Screeb, or they'll run up into Inver, and they'll find it to their liking, and they might even breed up there. It might just be a few fish at first, but then there'll be more, and then there'll be more, and then there'll be more, providing they don't have to face all the terrible threats of the estuaries as they are at present. Yeah, there are climate change, there's predation, there's poaching, there's all sorts of other threats, but it's just barely possible that given a generation or 2 generations, these fish might just come back. And if they do, we'll need the maps, we'll need the knowledge, we'll need the words, and we'll need the old stories. And when we tell them, and when we look at the maps, and we'll think, well, those old buggers, they knew a thing or two. And thank goodness we've got their words and we've got their maps. And I hope people will smile as they raise a glass of whiskey. There's the vision.
That's it's a nice vision.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
it's hopeful.
Wow.
With the word you said was barely, which I think is right. There's a sliver of a chance, maybe, like, you know.
Well, I don't know that there is, but I think back to my students and my teaching days. You know, I feel just as bleak as everybody else about the future of many, many things, not just sea trout. But I think we have, again, it's going to sound pious or, again, unbearable, but I was reading an interview by Max Hastings recently, and he said, you know, it's our duty to younger people, to the people who are coming after us, to try and to keep our chins up and try and sort of remain as optimistic as we can, and even to pretend optimism where there is none. We've got to remain hopeful. We've got to hang on to the best of what was in order to construct something viable that might come after us. We're leaving an awful lot for the people who come after us to do, but at least we can, you know, try and point in the right direction.
Well, my hope for it is that, you know, despite all the craziness and madness that goes on in the world, we're a very adaptable and innovative species. There's a lot of bad attached to that as well. But I do think we have an ability to adapt. My only concern about that is that, like I said, is it too late in the sense of, if 90% of nature is gone, you can't just recreate that. So it's okay. I'm always looking at and this is where, unfortunately, Tom, I think even if you get rid of the fish farms, that because of the way climate change is going anyway, the waters are going to be so warm. As Ken Whelan, I remember, once described this to me so well when we were talking about the salmon. They need cold, clean waters. They're going north, north, north. The numbers that are there, they're going further north all the time. So with the warm waters, sea trout might be a thing of the past, but then bringing it back to the adaptability of us as a species, we could be, we'd be fly fishing for other fish. And
I think it's already happening.
Yeah,
cod stocks in the North Sea. I mean, when I was a boy, people used to head to the north coast, to the east coast in the winter, and fish for codling in the spring. There'd be a run of codling up the east coast. These days, there are very few codling left, but the seas are warm enough to support increasing numbers of bass, and bass are being caught regularly now off the coast of East Yorkshire. I mean, that was almost unheard of 50 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like the way you read about tuna fishing off the coast of Ireland.
Yeah.
It's so like in 100 years' time, God knows whatever way the planet's going to be. But that generation ago, all those mad bastards, they used to catch a fish called a sea trout and a salmon. Whereas,
and they were really crazy about it. I don't know what the thing was about it.
It's small little, we're into tuna, and bass and all these much better species. That's a different framing of it altogether, isn't it?
It's strange, if I think now of fishing for sea trout, my mind projects itself ever further north.
Yeah.
So later this summer, I'm going up to the northern part of the Hebrides to fish for sea trout. We still have a few fish up there, and I can still enjoy fishing, as I understood it from 30 or 40 years ago. I dare say it's a nostalgic gesture, but it's something that I still find profoundly attractive. But perhaps Iceland will. It still has one or two sea trout rivers on its north coast.
It's just the bloody price.
Norway, So
they'll make it even more expensive. They'll make it even more expensive, Chris.
That's pretty expensive coming over to visit you.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, but it's worth it.
You're bound to say that. Is it worth it? But I just meet such crazy people in the west of Ireland. Sometimes I've got to scratch my head and have sort of 3 days of compression. And from the days when I was traveling regularly over to see you all, I mean, it'd take me 3 days to compress and to decompress and to simply unscramble some of the stuff that had fallen into my head.
Yeah. It's coming at you at a rate of knots, and you don't realize it at the time.
That's what worries me. I'm getting older. I mean, I'm not as resilient as I was.
Actually, Chris, what was the first sea trout you caught in Ireland? When?
It was on August the 25th, 1973, on Beat 3 of the Gowler River in Connemara.
Yeah?
Yeah, I got them on a Zulu. There was a big flood and the fish were running up a very fast, it was almost like a waterfall at the head of the pool. And the fish were resting in a slack by the side of the waterfall. I would never dream of fishing it now, actually. But these white trout were just resting there. The biggest was a pound and the other two were finnock, 12 ounces, half a pound.
Wow. You can pinpoint it. Fair play.
It was a day that changed my life, really.
Has sea trout fishing been, because of how many books is it 30 books you've written? Some crazy.
Well, if you count the ones that are currently, I mean, I have retired and I have don't hold me to what I'm about to say, okay? I have actually stopped writing, except I haven't.
Yeah.
Okay. And you say you have to decompress after talking to us.
Yeah. Well, I learned if
that's going in circles.
If I sound obscure and talking in riddles, I learned it all from you people.
Well, I
But
tell you
no,
one
I
thing.
mean,
You mastered it.
I can't quite put down all the words. So, for example, I found myself a couple of years ago. I will come back to your question in a second. I've forgotten what it was already, but it wasn't a particularly good question in the first place. But I will come back to it when you remind me what it was.
I might.
However, 2 years ago, I started noticing all the plants that I was seeing while I was fishing. And why is meadowsweet called meadowsweet? What a charming name. And so I looked it up in the OED and I thought, well, the dictionary must be able to tell me whether this is it something that sort of gladdens my view of a meadow? Not a bit of it. It's a plant that was used to sweeten mead, meadowsweet. So in the Middle Ages, meadowsweet was used, it was utilized. Nothing to do with, gladdening our view of the meadow. So I got interested in the etymology behind plant names. So every time I went fishing, as I still do now, I started photographing wildflowers and bringing the photographs home and then identifying the flowers if I didn't know what they was, and then looking up their etymologies and seeing how these plants were used in the Middle Ages, how they were associated in bits of legend and so on and so forth. So those few notes grew into what has now become a sort of, I think it might even have been a sort of become a book-length project. So although I've stopped writing, I haven't. That's the process behind
You can't help yourself.
With which I've just addressed you. Now, what was the original question?
It doesn't matter. I've forgotten it
How
now.
many books did I do?
But no,
if you count the co-written ones, the edited ones, the single-authored ones, it's about 30. It might be 32.
The reason I was going to ask you was because when you caught your first sea trout over here, it changed your life.
Yeah.
Or has sea trout fishing been the kind of spine or the narrative throughout your life that's always been there in the background? No. Okay.
Philology words were, and the love of words and the English language. That was my mainspring. And after everything else has been stripped away, now I'm not working as an academic. I'm no longer a professor. I have no friends left. Everything's falling apart. But what has survived is the words and my interest in words and structures. And that really was it manifests itself in poems, in books about the names of the fish. There was a whole section about in Nomads of the Tides, I think, about what sea trout were called. And I was delighted when Eamon de Butler told me about the etymology behind the Wexford word for sea trout, which is clown.
So tell us that.
Well, he said in Wexford, the sea trout, juvenile sea trout, are called the clown. Right. But it's always pronounced disyllabic, clown. And I was discussing this on the single occasion I was lucky enough to meet Eamon de Butler, rest in peace, may he go with God. And he said, well, look, the etymology is completely straightforward. It's Cullia Owen, maiden of the river. And you anglicise that, you run it together and you pronounce it quickly, Cullia Owen. Clown. And it's maiden of the river. So these are small sea trout in Wexford. And I was absolutely thrilled with that. And I put that with great pride and due reference into a book that I did about names of the fish. It's names of all the fish in fresh water, which is about their etymologies. And so I hope the Oxford English Dictionary will use that, because it would be nice, wouldn't it?
That's fascinating. Actually, just on the that sounds a fascinating book as well that you're putting together, that you're not writing about the plants.
It's been one of the most.
I'd love to see it when it doesn't come out.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's probably going to be far too good for a publisher. I mean, would you publish any of my works? This slightly strange, old, statin-filled English guy, who...
Well, a sea trout anglers would probably love it, like.
Yeah. There's a niche. There's always a niche somewhere.
There is, not in my world, there isn't. But in 1496, in the Treatise of Fishing with an Angle, there's a very august angling precedent for thinking about flowers and fishing. The author of the treatise says that, and I'm quoting, it's probably an inaccurate quote, but I'll do my best. So even if the angler catch no fish, nevertheless, he shall have his wholesome walk and savour the sweet smell of the meadow flowers. And I think that's really rather charming. Even if you're going to blank, you're doing something that's good for your body, and probably it's good for whatever you still call your soul. And it'll help you say, this is a quote, your customable prayer. And I really like that. And I think you have to be old to even begin to understand the sort of philosophical depth of that. It's not something you just think it's quaint and rather silly when you're little. But I like that.
I don't think you have to be else. I love in Walton's Complete Anger, isn't it? It's the quote at the start, isn't it? Where he talks about, I can't remember, but I always have it written down. It's, where it's about the, for the men, and it's not the men in the office. It's, for the people who go fishing, it's about, he's basically saying it's about being out in nature and about walking by the river, that you're not stuck in the office, and I just thought, it always struck me as like, that's from whatever 400 years ago, and even then they were complaining about being stuck in the office and not being able to get out, into nature. Like, and here we are.
I think that's possibly why the medieval fishing rod was constructed in the way it was. It was telescopic. It was 6 feet long, and the top joint fitted into the bottom joint. So the author says you can go about your work as an angler and, quotes, no man shall know whereabout you go. So in other words, you can disguise your fishing rod as a sort of handy stick.
Yeah, I guess.
And off you can go with your horsehair line coiled in your pocket and a pocket full of bait, and you can slope off. I can see you doing it now. You can slope off at lunchtime in your lunch break and just have a little go for the roach and the bleak in your local stream.
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny there because we just, it got me thinking there. You mentioned the practice of angling, and you, Dame Julie, the treatise on fishing. And, we think that somehow that this idea of just going fishing for mindfulness is a recent thing. But obviously, that's 500 years ago. And then you go, oh my God, they were enlightened back then. But then it got me to thinking of, and I found it, the aptly named Thomas Bastard from 1598. Right?
Go for it.
Right? So it just goes to show that people weren't always so happy, and that's 500 years ago. Right, all right. Thomas Bastard wrote this in 1598. It's from, I have the Magic Wheel anthology here.
Oh, yeah.
Fishing, if I as a fisher may protest, of pleasures is the sweetest, of sports the best, of exercise the most excellent, of recreations the most innocent. But now the sport is marred, and watch ye why. Fishes decrease, and anglers multiply.
Oh, there you go.
1598.
1598.
Wow. There you go. Yeah.
So there was obviously still both sides.
Anglers have always been complainers.
Yeah, too many fucking fishermen.
No, I think the treatise, I'm surprised that people don't know it more. I think it's a most magnificent, practical work. It's short, very much to the point, full of good advice. And the list of impediments, the author gives a list of what he or she calls impediments, which will cause you to catch no fish. And the first impediment is if your tackle be not good or well made. Tom.
Yep.
So, we've all been there.
Yeah.
And then another impediment is if it be a tempest from any direction.
Yeah.
So, it's just, it really is a very practical list of balefulness and excuses. It really is splendid.
Timeless, timeless. Before we let you go, Chris, can I ask, I don't think I asked this, what's your favorite fly fishing book that you've read?
Edward Gray, fly fishing.
Yeah.
And also, not the 1899 Haddon Hall first edition, but the later edition. He revised it in the 1930s towards the end of his life. And he added a chapter about salmon fishing on the Castling up in Sutherland. And it's only a short chapter, but I find it almost unbearably poignant because, he lost his brother in the First War. His house in Hampshire, which he so much loved, he and his wife so much loved, had burnt down. He himself had lost his sight, and by the end of his life, he was able only to fish for salmon by touch. So by then he couldn't see a rising fish. So his life was full of tragedy, and he appeared to bear all of this with a kind of tragic detachment. But I find the book, both for its knowledge, its exquisite prose, a little bit Wordsworthian, I find, for my taste these days, but nevertheless, it's still magnificent. But it's unbearably poignant. It moves me very much.
Wow. I wasn't expecting that one. I must reread it. I have it on my shelf. I've read it years ago. There's so much, such a rich.
Have you read it, Dara?
Yeah.
Actually, it's on one of my must read that book list. Yeah.
Oh, it's an absolutely splendid book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very charming. It is a little bit, even as I was saying that, the reason I paused when you asked the question was it's a little bit Wordsworthian. My own tastes have changed somewhat over the years, and I seem to have an increasing aversion to the works of William Wordsworth, with which I was sort of brought up. But anyway,
it's funny actually. Do you know what? And I know, Tom, you one more question for Chris as well. But I did want to say, like, I know we're kind of like, I don't know, is it old age or whatever? We're kind of talking more in the past tense, but I suppose though, fly fishing for Irish Sea Trout, it's still, you learn a lot about the past, but also the present as well. That I think for any fly angler that's interested in exploring the world of Irish Sea Trout, I think it's just between the information and where you can go and what you can do. And it's written beautifully as well. So I'd highly recommend it. And especially because for those people who haven't got their copy of Nomads. And I ain't selling mine.
And actually, me and that, because I never got a copy. The copy I had, I borrowed it. And it's like what you're saying about Gray's book. You read a bit and some bits stick in your head, but the beauty of having a book, particularly a fishing book, is to be able to go back to it. And I haven't been able to go back to it. And that's why this has been great to get the copy of this one and go over it. Some bits I remember, and then other bits I have no memory of at all that might have been in the last one. Then I'm going, oh, is that new stuff or whatever? But anyway, I've just enjoyed it, and really is beautifully written.
I think you're being far too kind, both of you. I think there is, behind all of the words, I mean, it's interesting to ask yourself the question, is there still a place for writing books and producing books at all in an age of the internet and AI? And I think there probably is. A book is a very compact thing. I mean, all the information that's in there, which took many, many years to assemble and put together and to write about, it would take you months. It would take AI, a few minutes to collect all that information and put it together in one set of covers. And even then, AI couldn't give you the stories or the context or the feel of a fishing day out in Ireland for sea trout. So I think there is still a place for books of this kind, even in, here we are stranded in 2026. So good. I'm glad. Thank you for saying what you said.
Yeah. And actually, through that, I've been looking through it. And initially, I was going to ask you because I suppose I was just thinking from my perspective and thinking of the Connemara fisheries. But I'm actually not going to say what your favorite Connemara fishery is. What's your favorite Irish sea trout fishery?
Oh, that's like saying, which is your favorite child? I can't possibly answer that.
None of the sea trout fisheries are listening. You can tell us.
The most I don't know. Nostalgically, you know, my past, a very distant past now, it lies in Connemara. But some of the most recent exhilarating fishing I've had was in Donegal. I love Strangford Loch for its challenges. And I also caught, I think, the most beautiful sea trout I've ever caught. It wasn't a particularly big fish. It was 2.5 pounds, something like that. It's illustrated actually in both in Nomads and in the new text. Strangford was just phenomenal. And yeah, I can't pick. It's just impossible. Yeah, I'm wading about between. See what I did there? Wading around in nostalgia and challenge
Okay, so
and
I got
excitement.
to narrow it down. So, your favorite Connemara fishery?
Oh, if I had to name a really happy day, it would be Careel.
You lucky person. I never got to fish it. I hear so many people say Careel was the place. Yeah, never got to fish it.
Well, I mean, it's the last time I was ever there was 1974.
Well,
But, you know, those experiences, again, they were absolutely life-changing. It was magnificent.
yeah, yeah. Well, you know, understand. You're not. It's interesting. You know, I've talked to a lot of people who have got to fish back at that period, and a lot of them all mention Careel. Mightn't say, you know, when they're talking about great sea trout days or great sea trout fishing, Careel invariably pops up at some stage.
Just while we're thinking about the past, I remember looking in 2008, 9, 10. It was around that time at the record books, the fishing record books, and Costello, Cashler. And I was looking to find out, you know, were the great old days of the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, were they really the great old days of 20 and 30 fish in the boat and, you know, 2-pounders and 3? And in August 1912, so this was before the First War, I came across an entry. It was an August day. Can't remember the exact date, but the name in the book was Colonel Muster, Muster.
Yeah.
And Colonel Muster had had a day on Glenwick Murren. And for his day on Glenwick Murren in August, when you had expect there'd be, you know, a lot of finnock running in, his sum total was 1 finnock, 8 ounces. And my heart leapt. And I thought, there is my soulmate across all the decades. Me and Colonel Muster, we had some great days out in Connemara. So it was absolutely splendid. So just in case we're tempted to waltz down memory lane, you know, in the direction of the great Connemara fisheries of yesteryear, you know, Colonel Muster would tell you that it wasn't all it was cracked up to be necessarily.
Brilliant. Absolutely.
It's worth keeping that in mind. Chris, it's been absolutely fantastic chatting to you again. You're now officially a friend of the show.
Oh dear.
Listen, the book is Fly Fishing for Irish Sea Trout. It's published by Medlar Press. Where can our listeners pick it up?
Medlar Press website.
Right.
So go direct to the publisher's website, and there you will find copies on sale. The website will relieve you of your pocket money very, very kindly.
Yeah, very easily.
I'm an old man now, and all contributions are gratefully received. Yes, have pity on a Valentu today. And yeah, there we are. Now go straight to the Medlar Press website. Now there you'll find it.
Oh, that's great. So listen, go straight to the Medlar Press. I can only highly recommend the book. I really enjoyed reading it. It's been a great read entirely. Chris, it's been fantastic having you on again. Thanks very much for joining us. Okay.
Thanks,
It's been
Chris.
great fun. Thanks for having me.
Our thanks to Chris for joining us on the show. And don't forget to rate, review and follow the Ireland on the Fly podcast on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from.
And keep up to date with all the latest from Ireland on the Fly on IrelandOnTheFly.com, as well as on Instagram or Facebook. That's all about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland.